What's up guys, welcome to another YouTube video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, you might want to do that now. When people see me walking around and shooting with a big f4 600mm lens, the assumption is always that I shoot wide open at f4 at all times. And why wouldn't I, right? Gives me the smoothest background, the fastest shutter speed. But then you watch my YouTube videos and you see me shooting at f8 all the time. How come? And why shouldn't you just blindly shoot at f4 at all times or wide open? Let me show you today. The key factor in this discussion is depth of field. In very simple terms, depth of field basically determines how much of the image is sharp in front and beyond the point you're actually focusing on. If you shoot at f4, your depth of field is very narrow, and then you could stop down to something like f22, get a lot of depth of field, but then you almost have no shutter speed. So that doesn't work either. So we have to find a compromise that works the best, that gives us the best result in terms of how much is in focus of the bird, what our background looks like, and the shutter speed we're getting. So for that, got myself a new friend that I'll be setting up today that will be helping out Charlie, that you know from my previous YouTube videos. We'll set him up, we play around with different apertures, and I'll show you exactly why I like to shoot at f8 and why I think it gives you the best results. He actually doesn't have a name yet, so if you have a good idea, hit me up in the comments, let me know, and I will have a poll in my Instagram stories. So let's set these guys up and get some shots. Mr. Fairin is all set up over there, found himself a nice open perch with a nice distant background, just dry green, bit of green, bit of brown grass, so that should look very nice in our pictures. Let's take 3 pictures. The first one, f4, ISO 200, 500ths of a second. Second one, f8, ISO 800, 500ths of a second. Third one, f11, ISO 1600, 500ths of a second. Let's do that. f4, f8, f11. Let's look at them. Zooming into these images, we see right away that of course the head, the eyes and the beak are sharp in all 3. Because I always focus on the head with the bird because I want the eye to be sharp. That's really important in your bird photos. But now let's look at the tail. In the f4 shot, it's basically completely blurry. In the f8 shot, it's a lot nicer. And in the f11 shot, it's basically completely sharp. So what does that tell us? Obviously, the more we stop down, the more of the bird will be in focus. The same is true for the perch. If we look at the perch, at f11 the whole perch is sharp, at f8 the same. At f4 we have a lot of bits of the perch and the bird's legs that are actually out of focus now. And that's something that I don't like. As you could see, the more we stop down, the higher we have to bump our ISO to get a decent shutter speed. However, if we shoot wide open at a low ISO, we saw that on a bird like this fairy wren, we lose the sharpness on the tail completely, and I think it's such a big feature of the bird that it's important to actually have that in focus. Now you might say, why don't you just always shoot at f11, Jan? Simply because today I set it up in basically the perfect conditions. It's nice and bright, we don't have to use too high ISO. If I shot at f11 all the time, I would probably get to the point where I'd have to bump my ISO too high, beyond 3200, or have to have my shutter speed too low. I usually don't like to shoot below a 400th of a second for a bird. So that's why I'm saying f8 is the perfect compromise for me. I still can use a decent ISO, have a decent shutter speed, and also get enough sharpness on the bird. It's our lucky day. Now we have 2 birds land on our perches. Let me show you why it's important you're shooting at f8 or think about your aperture rather than shooting wide open, because you will miss scenes like this. Let's do the same exercise, shooting at f4, f8, f11, see what happens. f4, ISO 200, 500ths of a second, f8, and f11. Comparing these 3 images, it becomes even more obvious now that the added depth of field of f8 or f11 have a dramatic impact on our image. At f4, we can only get 1 bird in focus. At f8, we get both birds at a reasonable sharpness. At f11 we get both birds tack sharp. So this is one of the main reasons why I often get 2, 3, 4 birds on my perches, get them all in focus, and you might not. Having the added depth of field of f8 or f11 gives me the ability to have birds that are slightly out of balance, still fully in focus, and get a great shot. If you shoot at f4, you have no chance of getting all the birds in focus. So why do I have an expensive f4 lens if I always shoot at f8? Well, first of all, the image quality is fantastic, and I have the ability to shoot wide open at f4 if I have to. However, the real power in this lens for me is the ability to use extenders. I can use the 1.4 extender and the 2x extender and get fantastic results still. If you have a zoom lens, 5.6, 6.3 lens, it's hard to add extenders because the image quality goes down a lot and you're already at wide open f9 or something. Whereas on this lens, if I add the 1.4 extender, I get a 5.6 840mm lens that's still fantastic image quality, and that's the real power for me. However, when you use extenders, make sure that you stop down at least one stop from wide open. So in this case, if I add the 1.4 extender, I want to stop down from 5.6 to f8 for added sharpness and also for added depth of field. Because if we add an extender, depth of field becomes even narrower. So the problem we've seen before with f4, f8, f11 even becomes amplified. So if you use an extender, you want to stop down at least one stop, if you can 2 stops, for added sharpness and added depth of field to get the best results. As we've learned in my other videos already, photography is always a compromise. Finding the right exposure, compromise. Finding the right background, it's always a compromise. So it comes to no surprise that picking the right aperture is also a compromise between depth of field and shutter speed. I think today I've shown you guys that always shooting wide open is not the way to go. You might want to shoot at wide open at f4, f2.8 if you want to use it for artistic purposes or if there's a super busy background, but think about it. Don't blindly shoot wide open just because you can. Shooting at f8 or f11 for little birds is actually far superior if you can afford it in terms of shutter speed and the background. By using f4, you get the cleanest files with the fastest shutter speed, but you're simply sacrificing too much depth of field and get so many elements of the image like the tail and the perch out of focus. That's why I like using f8 or f11. Ideally, I would like to use f11 all the time, but it's just not possible because it only works in perfect conditions with bright backgrounds and bright light, because otherwise the shutter speed will just be too low. So that's why I shoot at f8 all the times. It's simply the best compromise. Gives me the best results. If there's a second bird landing on my perch, I still have a reasonable chance to get it in focus as well, whereas f4, you have no chance of getting 2 birds in focus. So I hope that gave you an insight in my thinking why I use f8, why I don't just shoot wide open. I sometimes shoot wide open, but I always think about it. I don't just shoot wide open because I can, because then I limit myself and I get worse results than shooting at f8. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this. Is it reasonable to say get more depth of field at a little bit higher ISO that you can then clean up in Photoshop? Or are you all about shooting wide open, low ISO, getting a cleaner file but sacrificing depth of field? Let me know, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks!